Today we're comparing the Jesus of the Quran and the Jesus of the New Testament. Same virgin birth, same promised return. But one faith calls him a prophet, the other calls him God. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll see exactly where these two faiths agree and where neither side has ever budged. A man kneels on a prayer rug in Jakarta, forehead to the floor. A woman in Sao Paulo lights a candle, looks up at a painted face. A child in a classroom in Lagos recites a verse about him before she can even read fluently. A grandmother in rural Mexico whispers his name over a sick grandchild, the same way her own grandmother once did. None of them will ever meet, but they all just said the same name: Jesus. Almost 4 billion people shape their lives around this one man. 4 billion. And yet, ask any of them who he actually is, and you won't get one answer. You'll get two completely different men wearing the same name. One of them was never more than human, honored, extraordinary, but human until his very last breath. The other was, somehow, human and God at once. One never felt the nails of his own cross. The other died on it. And that death is why a third of the human race calls itself saved. Picture both claims side by side for a second. They can't both be literally true, and yet neither side is lying. Each one is simply following its own scripture to the letter. Neither tradition built itself on a careless reading of its own holy book. That's exactly what makes this so hard to just wave away. So which Jesus is real? Wrong question. The moment you try to decide who's right, you stop being able to see either side clearly. Here's the better one, the one worth the next 20 minutes. How do two of the largest faiths on earth, both devoted to this same man, end up this far apart? To find that answer, we start somewhere unexpected, with everything they already agree on. Picture a young woman, alone in the hills outside Jerusalem, unmarried, no child, yet. An angel tells her she's about to have one anyway. That scene appears in 2 holy books, 600 years apart. In the Quran, an entire chapter is named after her. Mary, Maryam, the only woman named anywhere in the book, mentioned there more often than in the entire New Testament. In the New Testament, the same kind of news, same impossible question, the same answer. Nothing is impossible with God. Here's a detail most people never learn. In Islam, denying the virgin birth means denying the Quran itself. It isn't optional, it's doctrine. And the surprises keep coming. As a newborn, the Quran says, Jesus speaks from his own cradle, defending his mother's honor before he's lived a single day. He heals the sick, raises the dead. In one striking scene, he shapes a bird out of clay and breathes it into flight. Both books call him the Messiah. Both say he lived without sin. His mission in the Quran continues a line of prophets running back through Moses and Abraham. His mission in the Gospels opens at a river, where a voice from an open sky calls him beloved Son before he's preached a single sermon. And both faiths agree on something almost nobody expects walking in. His story isn't finished. Authentic hadith say Jesus will return. The New Testament says the same thing centuries earlier in its own words. Same birth, same miracles, same promise that he's coming back. So where's the catch? Here it is, quiet, almost hidden. Every miracle Jesus performs in the Quran comes with 4 words attached: by God's permission. Never his own power, always borrowed. Remember that phrase. It's about to change everything that follows. If you grew up praying in a mosque, what's coming won't feel like a debate. It will simply feel true. If you grew up praying in a church, the opposite will feel just as true. Neither of you would be wrong to feel that way. You'd just be following 2 different maps of the same territory. This is the question every other difference in this story comes back to. What, exactly, is Jesus made of? In the Quran, his birth is compared to one other person, Adam. No father, no mother, made by a single word, be. The lesson is simple. A miracle proves God's power. It doesn't prove the man is God. Now picture a hillside in Galilee, crowded with people who've walked for days to hear him speak. Jesus turns to his own followers and asks who they think he is. One answers, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus doesn't correct him. 2 accusations, already pulling apart. Remember the titles from a moment ago. Messiah, a word from God, a spirit from him. Classical Islamic scholars are clear what those mean. Word describes how he was created by God's command, not what he is. Spirit is read as an honor, not a presence living inside him. In the Gospel of John, that same word appears, but the meaning flips completely. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. Not God's message about a person, God's message as a person. 3 centuries later, Christian bishops met at a city called Nicaea, after generations of argument, and made it official. Jesus is of one substance with the Father, fully God, fully human. 2 natures, 1 person. The Trinity. The Quran answers this directly. Do not say 3, it warns. God is one. Nothing, not even Jesus, is allowed to share in that oneness. One faith says God could never become a man. The other says he already did. Everything still ahead of us, the cross, the ending, grows out of this one fork in the road. A Friday afternoon, outside the walls of Jerusalem, a Roman governor washing his hands of the decision. A crowd, a cross raised on a hill called Golgotha. The cross. Almost nobody disputes that this scene happened. Even the Roman historian Tacitus recorded it. A man called Christ, executed under the governor Pontius Pilate. As ancient history goes, this is about as solid as it gets. What happens next is where the 2 faiths split completely. According to the New Testament, this death was the plan all along. God's own deliberate sacrifice in human form to pay for human sin. Paul, writing within a generation of the event, called the whole idea foolishness to outsiders, and told his readers to accept that, because to Christians, it was the opposite. It was the center of everything. According to the Quran, it never happened. Not like that. Chapter 4 says plainly, they did not kill him. They did not crucify him. It only appeared that way to them. God raised him up to himself. For most of Islamic history, scholars have read this the same way. God rescued his messenger before the cross could happen at all. Not a death disguised, a death prevented. Someone else was made to look like Jesus and was crucified instead. A small minority of scholars, even today, read the same verse differently, denying only the meaning the crucifixion was given, not the event itself. So picture both stories, side by side, the same Friday, told twice. In one telling, the cross is a disaster God stopped, just in time. In the other, it's a disaster God walked into, on purpose. One faith reads the empty cross as a rescue. The other reads it as love. Either way, and this is what both faiths agree on, Jesus did not stay dead, did not stay defeated. What happens next pulls the two stories even further apart. 3 days later, a tomb, empty. The resurrection. According to the Gospels, Jesus appears alive to his closest followers, then, according to Paul's own account, to more than 500 people at once. Paul, one of his earliest followers, put it without softening it at all. If this didn't really happen, the whole faith is worthless, and Christians are simply wrong about everything. The resurrection isn't a footnote to the crucifixion, it's the proof the cross actually worked. In Islam, there's no resurrection scene to tell, because in this account, there was no death on the cross to rise from in the first place. Jesus was simply taken up alive, waiting. Two faiths, two completely different miracles, doing two completely different jobs. And from here, each one answers the most personal question of faith can be asked. How does a person actually get right with God? Imagine growing up hearing only one of these answers and hearing the other only as a rumor about what those people believe. Which one would feel obvious to you? In Christianity, the answer often centers on someone else. Faith in what Jesus already did on the cross. A gift, not something earned. The New Testament itself calls him the one mediator between God and humanity, and many Christians pray through him. In Islam, the answer points straight back to the individual. Submission to God directly, sincere faith, good deeds, with no one standing in between. Prayer goes straight to God, never through Jesus, never through anyone. Same starting point, same beloved man. Two completely different answers to what he's actually for. And neither answer is presented inside its own faith as a small detail. Each one sits at the very center of how a believer is supposed to live every single day. Both faiths agree on something unexpected. Jesus is coming back. What he does next is where they split one final time. In Islamic tradition, verified through its most trusted hadith, Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, Jesus returns near Damascus. He defeats a figure of deception known as the Dajjal. He rules with justice. In one of the most pointed images in the whole tradition, he breaks every cross still standing on earth. Then, like any other human being, he dies a natural death, like everyone before him, before the judgment that awaits us all. In the New Testament, Jesus also returns, visibly in glory. Every eye will see him, the book of Revelation says. But this time, he isn't fixing the world on someone else's behalf. He's the judge of everyone, the living and the dead. One ending, an honored man finishing his task and finally resting. No different, in the end, from any other person who ever lived. The other, an authority that, in Christian belief, was never on loan to begin with. there's nothing for him to hand back, because it was always his. Same man, same return. Two completely different reasons it matters. So why did one man become two such different figures? It took Christianity nearly 300 years to settle this question formally. The earliest Christians already believed Jesus was divine. Paul's letters say so within 20 years of the crucifixion. But the exact language took centuries of argument, ending at councils like Nicaea. 6 centuries later, the Quran arrives in Arabia, in direct, sustained contact with real Christian communities of the time, including one in Najran, in today's Yemen, some of whom held views about Jesus that were themselves considered unusual by later Christian standards. When the Quran insists, "Do not say 3," it may be answering claims actually circulating around it, not necessarily the final doctrine Christianity would only settle on generations later. And underneath all of it sits the real divide. What is revelation in the first place? Islam holds that the Quran is God's own words, delivered directly, unchanged by human hands. Christianity holds that the New Testament was written by inspired people, then refined by the Church over centuries into formal doctrine. One faith says the final word arrived all at once. The other says the truth needed time to be understood. Once you see that, nothing else in this story feels strange. It starts feeling inevitable. Two communities, reading Revelation through two different lenses, arriving at two coherent but irreconcilable answers. This isn't ancient history sitting in a book. Walk into a mosque on Friday or a church on Sunday, anywhere on earth, and you'll see it still alive. For well over 1 billion Muslims, Jesus is not a minor figure borrowed from someone else's faith. He's one of the most loved prophets in the entire tradition. For well over 2 billion Christians, he's the living center of personal hope. Two different relationships with the same man. One shared longing underneath both. Mercy that doesn't run out. Some proof that death isn't the end. You can see that longing in small human ways too, in a Muslim family naming a newborn son after him, or a Christian family doing the very same thing for reasons that look almost identical from the outside. In 2007, over 100 Muslim scholars wrote an open letter to Christian leaders worldwide, built on one idea both faiths claim as central: love God and love your neighbor. The differences here are real. They shouldn't be smoothed over, and pretending otherwise would dishonor both traditions equally. But understanding why they exist, instead of assuming the other side simply got it wrong, replaces contempt with curiosity. And curiosity is usually where real understanding begins. So, back to where we started. How can two faiths, both holding the same man in total reverence, end up describing two different beings entirely? Not because either side was careless with the truth. Each built a civilization's worth of belief on one honest, internally consistent answer to the same enormous question. Who was this man, and what was God doing through him? Islam answers, God's power, moving through a human being unlike any other, but human still, because nothing is allowed to share in the absolute oneness of God. Christianity answers, God himself, wearing a human face, because only God, in this telling, could close the distance between a perfect creator and an imperfect creation. Two answers, 14 centuries of history between them. And somehow, after every argument, every council, every page written on either side, they still arrive at the same room. A virgin, a miracle, a promise that he isn't finished yet. Maybe that's the real story here, not who's right, but what it means that two civilizations separated by language and centuries could look at the very same face and both feel compelled to fall to their knees in front of it. 2 billion candles, lit somehow from the same flame, burning to this day in two different colors. This has been To Perspective. If this comparison opened a door for you, stay with us. There's another chapter to this story waiting. Subscribe for more honest, respectful journeys through the world's great beliefs. Thank you for watching.